Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something absolutely wild. We're peeling back the layers on extreme wealth to see the exact mechanisms that make a number like $1 trillion even possible. We're looking at a fascinating, highly grounded scenario. June 12, 2026, the exact day Elon Musk's net worth allegedly blasts past the $1 trillion mark.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll wrap our heads around that trillion-dollar milestone. Then, we'll dive into the illusion of paper wealth, the psychology of selling dreams over fundamentals, the buy, borrow, die strategy, and finally, how politics, power, and wealth all intersect. Let's get into it.
All right, Section 1, the trillion-dollar milestone.
The source analysis anchors on a hypothetical but totally plausible event. Imagine an unprecedented SpaceX IPO that instantly pushes a single person's net worth past $1 trillion in the very first second of trading. Now, a 1 followed by 12 zeros is, well, it's almost impossible for the human brain to comprehend. To put that sheer scale into perspective, the analysis points out that if you spent $1 million every single day, it would take you over 2,700 years to run out of $1 trillion. Crazy, right?
Actually, time gives us the best analogy to really feel this difference. If you count back 1 million seconds, you go back about 11.5 days, less than 2 weeks. But if you count back 1 trillion seconds, you're going back 31,000 years. That is literally before the dawn of human civilization. A trillionaire holds a level of wealth that straight up rivals the GDP of most modern nations.
Which brings us to Section 2, the illusion of paper wealth.
So you might be wondering, does $1 trillion actually exist in a giant vault somewhere? Well, the breakdown is super revealing. The source highlights that only about 0.1% of this net worth is actual liquid cash. The vast majority is tied up in company shares, specifically a 38% stake in SpaceX and a 15 to 25% stake in Tesla, meaning this is almost entirely paper wealth. If someone actually tried to sell off a massive chunk of those shares for cash, they'd flood the market, trigger a panic, and instantly crash the value of the very companies making them rich in the first place.
And that brings us to a really stark financial critique from the analysis. There is a massive disconnect here. We're looking at a $2.2 trillion market valuation for SpaceX, but Morningstar estimates its value at just $780 billion. Add in a reported operating loss of $5 billion in 2025, and, well, a glaring question pops up. How exactly does a company losing billions of dollars command a multi-trillion-dollar valuation?
Moving right along to Section 3. Selling dreams over fundamentals. To understand that huge valuation gap, the analysis shifts gears from math to market psychology. It specifically references economist Burton Malkiel's castles in the air theory. See, traditional investors usually look for a firm foundation, actual revenue, solid profit margins, boring stuff like that. But the castles in the air theory argues that valuations can be driven entirely by psychological hype. Investors aren't necessarily buying into the current financial reality of the company. They're buying into a grand sci-fi dream of the future.
But when the source looks at the historical timeline, a lot of those grand dreams haven't quite materialized. We've got the 2013 Hyperloop concept for superfast transport that was ultimately wound down, a 2014 promise to send humans to Mars within 10 to 12 years, claims in 2015 of fully autonomous driving within 3 years, and those 2017 traffic tunnel concepts that ran into some pretty massive real-world hurdles. The history presented here suggests the market repeatedly buys into these sci-fi visions even if they don't arrive on schedule. This skepticism is perfectly captured by prominent investor Steve Eisman. Yeah, the guy who famously predicted the 2008 housing crash. He literally called this kind of valuation an IPO of a sci-fi story, tailor-made for a sci-fi cult. His argument is that this level of wealth relies a lot more on a financial cult of personality than it does on standard, boring business metrics.
That leads us into Section 4, the buy, borrow, die strategy. Okay, so if all this wealth is locked up in paper, how do billionaires actually pay for their extravagant lifestyles? Well, the answer is a fascinating, totally legal 3-step loophole. Step 1, buy and hold. By literally never selling their shares, they avoid triggering any capital gains or income taxes. Step 2, borrow. They use those massively valued shares as collateral to take out giant bank loans at super low interest rates. Boom, tax-free cash to live on. And step 3, die. Under certain tax rules, this wealth can be passed down to heirs without the same tax burdens, and the whole cycle just keeps spinning. To make this super concrete, the source gives us a perfect real-world example of that borrow phase.
When funding the purchase of Twitter, a $12.5 billion cash loan was secured by mortgaging roughly $62.5 billion worth of Tesla shares. It's a flawless demonstration of how paper wealth gets magically transformed into massive buying power without ever technically selling a single share or paying income tax on that cash.
Now, this source uses this to point out a pretty profound societal impact. When you look at effective tax rates side by side, the data shows that between 2014 and 2018, as this wealth increased by billions, the effective tax paid was around 3.2%. Contrast that with the average American worker, who pays anywhere from 20 to 30% in income tax. It really highlights how the system just fundamentally operates on different rules for folks holding massive paper assets. All right, moving to our final section, Section 5, Politics, Power, and Wealth.
This brings us to the argument that political lobbying acts as a major catalyst to secure and multiply this wealth. The analysis points to some serious political donations, specifically citing a $290 million contribution to the Trump 2024 campaign. The source argues that this political alignment correlates directly with a five-fold wealth increase over 2 years, along with the alleged dropping of 40 pending investigations into corporate activities.
And hey, it's not just domestic politics. International relations act as a massive wealth multiplier too. The explainer looks at 2025 and highlights meetings with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. It argues that these high-level state interactions quickly paved the way for Starlink to score satellite internet licenses in India, while simultaneously removing certain national security conditions that had previously been major roadblocks. Furthermore, the analysis claims that direct regulatory changes were rushed through specifically to make this trillion-dollar milestone happen. A new fast entry rule was introduced by NASDAQ, slashing waiting periods down to just 15 days. On top of that, it claims the SEC excused brokers from certain safe account rules just days before the IPO. The really critical takeaway the source emphasizes here is that these rushed deregulations potentially put $70 billion of public pension and retirement money on the line to secure that mega valuation.
Zooming out to the big global picture, the source leaves us with a pretty poignant contrast. According to the UN World Food Program, it would take an estimated $40 billion to eliminate world hunger by 2030. When you contrast that $40 billion global necessity against one single individual's $1 trillion net worth, it really underscores the sheer volume of extreme wealth that remains concentrated. Which leaves us with this final, really provocative question. Is a $1 trillion net worth truly the byproduct of world-changing, futuristic innovation, or is it the result of a complex financial and political system perfectly designed to inflate and protect paper wealth? It is an absolutely fascinating lens through which to view modern wealth. I hope this explainer helped break down the mechanics behind the math for you. Thanks so much for joining me, and as always, keep questioning the world around you.